Cowboy saved a giant Apache from a bear trap. Next day, the chief demanded he marry his daughter. The iron jaws slammed shut with a violent crack that ripped through the empty desert like a gunshot, and the scream that followed was not the voice of an ordinary woman, but the raw cry of pain torn from the lungs of someone born into battle as Tyanita, the daughter of the Apache chief, crashed hard onto the burning sand with her powerful leg locked between the rusted spikes of the bear trap, dust bursting upward around her as blood poured from the deep wounds and soaked into the thirsty earth beneath, her massive body trembling not from weakness, but from the shock of being violently overpowered by a machine built to kill, her muscles tightening as she fought with uncontrollable fury, dragging her hands across the ground, trying to tear the iron apart with pure strength alone, every movement driving the jagged teeth even deeper into her flesh until pain exploded through her veins like fire. And for the first time in her life, the terrifying truth reached her heart, that even the strongest warriors could be broken by cold, silent steel, that death did not always come from an enemy's blade, but could rise unseen from beneath the ground. And as that realization crashed into her, she heard a distant sound breaking through the fog of agony, the steady rhythm of hooves cutting slowly across the land, each step growing louder as a lone figure emerged from the curtain of heat and dust. A weather-worn cowboy named Cole Wilder, whose life had been shaped by loss, survival, and endless roads. A man who had buried fear so deeply that only instinct remained, and whose first instinct at the sight of the towering, wounded woman was to turn away because everything about her spoke the language of danger and death. Yet his eyes fell upon the blood darkening, the sand, and the way her breath shook with pain, and something inside him refused to let his boots carry him in the opposite direction, instead drawing him forward against reason, against survival itself, his hands rising slowly as he knelt toward the massive trap, speaking in calm, broken words, even as his heart pounded violently in his chest, while Tyanita turned her fierce gaze upon him, ready to strike, even with her strength bleeding out into the ground, her body coiled with rage and agony. But she did not see cruelty in his eyes, only tension, fear, and a stubborn human refusal to abandon another living soul. And as Cole gripped the heavy sprung steel of the bear trap, he understood immediately that brute strength alone would not save her. The mechanism built to crush the bones of animals twice his size, his arms trembling as he strained against it with everything he had, his teeth clenched as the iron refused to yield, every failed attempt forcing another scream from Tyanita's chest until the sound of her suffering began to tear at his sanity, and desperation pushed him to snatch a thick stone from the ground, slamming it into the joint of the mechanism, forcing leverage where muscle had failed, iron shrieking against iron as the trap shifted by the smallest fraction. And in that narrow breath between failure and success, Cole hurled his full weight forward once more, prying the jaws wider with reckless force, and with one violent surge dragged her wounded leg free from the metal, blood bursting out in a crimson flood as both of them collapsed into the sand beside the defeated trap, the desert falling unnaturally, silent around them as if the land itself stood in stunned disbelief at what had just happened. Tyanita gasping for breath as pain ripped through her, while Cole stared at his blood-soaked hands in shock, unable to fully comprehend that he had just pulled a stranger back from the edge of death. And without hesitation he tore the scarf from his neck and bound it tight around her shattered thigh, rapping with frantic urgency to slow the bleeding, his fingers slick with warmth as he fought to keep her alive. And after long moments she lifted her heavy gaze toward him, her voice low and broken with strain, as she asked him why he had done this, why he had risked his life for someone who could have crushed him even while trapped. And Cole answered without calculation that no living being deserved to die alone in the dirt screaming for mercy. And those words struck her deeper than any weapon ever had, because they shattered something Inside her, that strength, alone, had always protected, and through the long, brutal night that followed, he did not leave her side, lifting her onto his horse despite her enormous weight, guiding the trembling animal through darkness as she clung to his shoulder with fading power and relentless will, every mile carved into them with pain. And when the Apache scouts finally surrounded them with drawn bows and murder already written into their posture, Cole felt death rise around him at last, certain that his foolish mercy would be buried beneath that sand. Yet Tyanita lifted her blood-smeared hand and stopped them with a single commanding gesture, and the moment the scouts lowered their weapons was the moment Cole's fate slipped forever beyond his control, because the trap that had closed around her leg had already closed invisibly around his life. When Cole opened his eyes the next morning, the first thing he felt was the harsh bite of rope, cutting into his wrists, the second the heavy, suffocating silence of a camp that watched without speaking. Apache warriors moving through the space around him with steady purpose, not striking him, not accusing him, only observing him as if he were no longer a man, but a verdict waiting to be pronounced. His body aching from the savage night ride and his mind trapped in the image of Tyanita's broken strength and unshaken will, the hours stretching endlessly until the presence of the Apache chief altered the very air, an old man shaped by decades of war and sacrifice, stepping forward with eyes forged from iron patience, his gaze settling on Cole with the quiet force of someone who had ended lives with single words. And when he spoke, there was no anger in his tone, only judgment, his question simple and devastating, as he asked whether Cole had saved his daughter knowing she was Apache, and Cole answered without hesitation that he had saved her because she was dying, not because of who she was. And the chief revealed nothing of what that answer meant, leaving Cole alone again with uncertainty gnawing at his chest as the day dragged into evening, and the fires were lit across the camp. And at last Tyanita emerged from the central lodge, supported by a carved staff, her wound bound, her strength diminished, but her presence still heavy with authority. And she spoke before anyone could silence her, declaring that she lived only because the stranger had refused to abandon her to death, that her blood still moved because his hands had chosen mercy over fear. And if the tribe took his life, they would also erase the truth of her survival. The chief listened without interruption and then delivered a judgment that struck harder than any execution could have, declaring that the debt of a life saved was older than any man's law and could only be repaid through fate itself, that the man who had rescued the chief's daughter would not walk away as a wandering outsider, and that Cole Wilder would either bind his life to Tyanita through marriage or be put to death beneath Apache law as a man who rejected destiny. The crowd erupted in stunned voices as Cole's world collapsed in on itself, because he had faced death with a steady hand, yet now trembled before a future he had never chosen, his eyes locking with Tyanita's as he searched for refusal, for fury, for anything that would shatter the chain being forged between them. But instead he found only resolve, and the quiet gravity of someone who believed that the spirits had already spoken long before any human judgment, and that realization unsettled him more deeply than the threat of dying ever could. The night passed under the weight of an impossible choice as two strangers bound by blood and iron stood on opposite sides of a fate neither had called into being. And when the ceremony came, their hands were tied together before the fire, not as lovers but as survivors, claimed by consequence. And in the heat of the flames and the pressure of every watching eye, Cole understood that the bear trap had not nearly taken only Tyanita's life. It had captured his own and dragged him into a world of honor, vengeance, tradition, and war that would reshape everything he believed he was. And as their hands were joined, neither love nor peace yet lived between them, only the dangerous truth that two lives had collided at the edge of death and could never again walk separate paths.